Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Julie O'Shea, and I'm the Manager of Global Marketing here at BlackBag. Before we get started today, there are a few notes that we'd like to review. This webinar, Analyzing macOS with BlackLight's Apollo plugin, is being recorded, and we will share the on-demand version when the webinar is complete. If you have any questions, please submit them in the questions window, and we will answer them throughout and in our Q&A at the end of the webinar. I'm excited to introduce our speaker today, Sarah Edwards. Sarah is a senior digital forensics researcher here at BlackBag, working in the DC metro area and specializing in Mac and mobile forensics. She has worked with various federal law enforcement agencies and has performed a variety of investigations, including computer intrusions, criminal and counterintelligence, terrorism, and narcotics. Sarah's research interests include anything and everything Apple related, mobile devices, digital profiling, and Mac and mobile device security. Sarah has presented at many industry security and forensic conferences and is the author and instructor of the SANS course on Mac forensic analysis and incident response. Thanks for joining us today, Sarah. If you're ready, I will hand it over to you now to get started.
Thank you. All right, welcome everybody. This is kind of a part 2 presentation. So I talked a little bit about the Apollo plugins for BlackLight with iOS back in January, and I think Julie will put the link into the chat for you there. So if you haven't seen this one's kind of a part 2. So this one, I'm going to talk about the Mac side of the house. So what is Apollo? So Apollo is the Apple pattern of life lazy outputter. And I stress that it is lazy. What it does, it basically takes all these different databases. Before it was for iOS, now we're moving to macOS. It takes all these different SQLite databases, throws different SQL queries at them, and then outputs that data. Now, if you just run the straight up Apollo script, which is available on my GitHub, you get SQLite or CSV output. But for this particular one, I'm going to show you the BlackLight version of that. So whether you just want, just to run a Python script, you want BlackLight to do the heavy lifting for you, you're going to get the same type of information from either side. So it's purely up to you. Now, as far as what pattern of life is, this is how users use their devices. Everything from which applications they're using, health data, specifically when we talk about iOS, the different device statuses, is it on and off, locked or unlocked, plugged in, unplugged, location information. So I've been spending a lot of time, more or less, just going through these kind of obscure databases to extract some of this really useful information. And this is how Apollo was born. Now, as far as how Apollo works, well, it takes these SQLite databases and it runs a query. So I have an example of what I call an Apollo module here. Each database could have a variety of different queries, all pulling out little different pieces of data to throw into the different outputs on here. So this is one module. We get a little bit of metadata up here. Really important pieces here are the database. It needs to know what database it's actually going to perform this query on. In this case, we're looking at a knowledge C. I think for knowledge C, I probably have upwards of 20, 25 different queries, each pulling out a separate aspect of use for that particular database. The versions, so platforms and versions here. So with this introduction of a lot of the macOS plugins, these are relatively new. They only came out in about the last month, 1 to 2 months or so. You're not going to see platforms for iOS and macOS. And a lot of the times the queries can be run on each platform. So sometimes Mac and iOS are very much the same, and sometimes they are completely different. So if you just want to go in here and find the queries, look for the versioning information. Whenever you see things like 12, 13, and even older, that's for iOS. The Mac OS one is going to be 10, 13, 14, and 15. And I try to go backwards compatible about 3 versions or so. But you will find that different queries will run on different platforms as well as different versions of the database. So this is an application in focus. We are going to go over this one a little bit more within the BlackLight example. So that is a module. Now, I think I have about 207 of them right now, which is crazy to think about. That's a lot of SQL queries to look at. But you can certainly go and kind of play around with them on my GitHub. So if you just have the database, you don't want to run any of the tools, you can just copy and paste this SQL query, throw it into your favorite database viewer, and you can run and get the same output. What the tools do for you is correlates that and automatically does this. So this is the whole reason why I created Apollos, because if I have 207 queries, I don't want to run that 207 times manually. That takes a long time to do. Now, I'm mostly focusing here on specifically macOS today and iOS I talked about in January, but this is fairly cross-platform. If you have SQLite databases on Android, which I know there is quite a few of, even on Windows, on Linux systems, it doesn't matter. Apollo will still work with all of those as long as you have the module created for that. And if you need some help doing that, please feel free to contact me. I want people to use this. I wanted to make it as easy as possible. Now, as far as the BlackLight plugins go, so if you've updated your version of a BlackLight about a year or so ago, you've probably noticed that there's a new section over here, this little green puzzle piece. This is the new plugins, and right now the only plugin is for my Apollo project. I'm going to tell you a little bit about all the different modules, but one thing that you want to basically keep track of is making sure that you're using the latest and greatest. So nights and weekends, and whenever I get some interesting databases that I want to look at, I'm constantly creating new modules. And I just released today onto GitHub some more screen time modules that I've just completed. So if you find your version up here, and if you go to Manage Plugins, you'll find the version. Just go to the GitHub and make sure that you're using the latest and greatest. If you're not, you'll want to download that Apollo master zip file. Just download zip here and then install it using the install button. So always make sure that you're using the newest modules. All right. Now, as far as today's topics go, we're going to kind of go into some more user aspects. First off, we're going to talk about application usage, some notifications, even what media they might be looking at. And then we're going to roll into the system side of things. So maybe more from a security, maybe you're doing computer intrusion type work. So we're going to take a little bit more look at the system state, processes, network, as well as specific security features of macOS. So kind of a two-piece series here. Now I'm gonna probably split this down the middle. It's not quite the middle of the whole presentation, but if you do have questions, I'll leave a little bit of time in between for some questions. So go ahead and throw them into the chat window that you're seeing on your GoToWebinar screen. So happy to answer any questions. Now, as far as the Mac side goes, this is where I pulled the databases. Now, I've actually created far more modules than I'm actually going to go over with in this particular presentation here, but these are the databases that I'm working with today. And if you see my iOS one, you're probably already familiar with Knowledge C and PowerLog, perhaps some network usage. So there are Mac versions of some of the same databases. So I'm going to talk more about these in this presentation. But then we get some more Mac specific ones like quarantine and TCC database, notification center over here, and then a new one. And this new one, this in screen time, this is technically, I created it for the Mac, but it's also backwards compatible to iOS devices too. So I'm going to show you the Mac side here, but if you have an iOS full file system dump ready to go, update your Apollo plugins and you'll be able to see these new screen time modules here because it's the same database across platforms, which is really nice to have. Now, as far as grabbing these databases, I went in, and these are all databases from my own system here. This is my work system, for better, for worse. I went in with Macquisition, the latest and greatest version. I think it's what, 2020 R1 is the latest version. And I created an LO1, or a logical image file for that. So I went in, I used this new search capability, which I really love, and just searched for all the different databases and files that I wanted to talk about to you today. So I grabbed all that, and we're looking at about almost just under 80 megs worth of databases. Some of these databases are huge, some in many megs versus of size here. So there is a lot of information that we can parse out of these particular databases. So I created an LO1 and I loaded it into BlackLight. So just to give you an example of what we're seeing here. Oops. All right, so on my evidence side here, I have my MacQ data collection, and this is just going to store all those databases that I asked for into this LO1 file. I drag this out a little bit, you will see that there is LO1s in there. Next up, I want to go over to the plugins area here. So I'm already in the plugins view, but this is the Apollo listing here. Now again, I want to make sure that I'm using the latest and greatest. So I can go up to Manage, Plugins, and I should have this screen here. So I'm using May 7th, 2020. So I quite literally just updated this, I don't know, about 90 minutes or so ago now. So I've already loaded that into into BlackLight. So if I wanted to update this, maybe I had the January version in here, I would go in here to install, point it to the Apollo master zip file from GitHub, and it's going to automatically install. It takes about 2 seconds to do this. So I would recommend going to that and making sure that you do have the latest and greatest. So once that's all done, and you load up the plugins view here, you're going to see something that looks like this. So these are all the plugins. Whether or not it can actually run on a Mac or an iOS or any other platform you might create plugins for, it's going to list them all here. So we have everything from the knowledge database, net usage we're going to talk about, power log, quarantine, screen time we're certainly going to talk about, and these are all labeled as part of the module name. So you can always go flip back and forth to say, okay, which ones am I looking for? They're all kind of nicely categorized right here. So I will be bouncing back and forth between a few of these as we go along. All right, so first topic, we're going to talk about application usage. So we're going to talk about screen time. We're going to get into some of the knowledge C, some of the power log databases. So we can find application usage in a lot of different places, but it's all kind of different. So first one we're going to talk about is screen time. Screen time I might use as a quick triage. It's going to store it for about 30 days or so, but it's not going to give you specific timestamps. It's going to be on a per hour basis because it's really just aggregating that information. If I want more specific information, that's where I'm going to go to the knowledge C, the power log, and I'm going to get more very, very specific timestamps associated with a particular application. So I'll go through and kind of give you some examples as we go along. Oops, nope. There we go. So first one, we got screen time here. Just this, again, this is an example. This is my data that we're looking at. So if you've not used screen time before, it's one of the newer features to Mac and iOS. It actually came out on iOS first, then was introduced in Catalina or 10.15 on the Mac side of the house. So we got my screen time usage here. So this is theoretically how long have I been using my devices. And then I say devices, it can actually be more than one device. So first off, a user has to have screen time turned on. And then a user would want to have to select another checkbox that says, share this information across all devices. So in my data, you're actually going to find that there's quite a few devices. It's got my, my work system here. It's got my personal laptop. It's got a few of my iOS devices in here too. And it's all aggregating this information in these particular databases. So the first piece that we're going to see here, screen time is basically built out of 4 different queries. The first one I'm going to call by hour. So this is aggregating kind of your what's the word I'm looking for here? Your overall per hour screen usage. So it shows a total usage up here about 8.5 hours. But what we're looking at aggregating here is this per hour usage. So this little bar graph thing down here. So this is what we're going to be taking a look at extracted from the database. Let me swing over to BlackLight's. So we got per hour here. All right, let me zoom in just a little bit. All right, so the query has already been run. So this is not how it looks like in the database, but it's more or less putting that query together. So what we're looking at here is a per hour aggregation. So we're sorting here on that per hour. We see it's 4 p.m., 5 p.m., 6 p.m., and so on and so forth. In the original database, it's usually storing these times by seconds, the usage information by seconds. But I've added a little column to the SQL query to show it to me in minutes because it just makes more sense to me. Okay, this one's 40 minutes, this one's 54 minutes, this one's 27, almost a half an hour worth of time. Now, other information that's going to be extracted from here is information about the users and about the devices. So it's all a matter of what user account information has been associated. So I see my name here, Sarah Edwards, the name and platform of the device, and we can see it going back and forth between my work system and my iPhone. So naturally, I'm probably going to play with both devices throughout the day. So you might see a few more in here as well. The device IDs, the UDID information, so very, very specific to a certain device, so you know which device this came from, which is very nice. These are more like the serial numbers almost from a device. They are unique to a specific device. And when you see over here, local user device state as a 1, this is where the device that this database was extracted off of. So I can see that this was extracted off of my work MacBook Pro versus my iPhone 11. So you might get similar information if you extract it off of another device as well. May not necessarily be exactly the same. Sometimes Apple acts a little bit weird, at least in my analysis so far, but it's going to be pretty darn close. But what we can see here is me going back and forth between different devices with different usage times. And I can certainly add up all of these for a certain day and get that full day's amount of information. So that 8.5 hours that we saw in the screenshot before. Now you don't see it over here, but if I kept going and kept scrolling to the right, you're going to find more iCloud specific information. Identifiers like your iCloud person ID, your DSIDs, your alternate DSID information. So you will have more specific information being stored in there. You might have also some iCloud family information. So if you have a family share account, it's going to show you whether you're an adult, whether you're a child, and items associated with that too. So there's a lot of information that is being extracted from this particular database. So that is by hour. Now we're going to do by category. So we're going to go to that lower section, and the categories, as Apple has kind of organized things into, are these first few up here, whether it's games or social networking, productivity, health and fitness. But I have found doing my analysis that there's a few ones that are not showing up in the main GUI screen. So I have kind of boringly named them unspecified 1, 2, and 3. So these are more like system level things like the Finder or the system preferences or some other sort of application. It just doesn't get aggregated into what the user sees. The information is still being collected, which is nice. Just the user is not going to find that. So we're going to be looking at by category. All right. So let me just consolidate these ever so little. All right, so we're starting to see some of that iCloud information over here. The family type, whether it's adult or child. I'm in fact an adult, at least legally, maybe not with my humor. My Apple ID information as well. So this is keeping track of per category. So under the category ID, I can see it going back and forth with things like productivity, entertainment, unspecified, whatever that might be. And we're going to take a closer look at those, what those applications are in another query here. So we're going to see kind of the total time here. So same thing, we're looking at the different device names here as well as the different device IDs. Now, one thing I do like to point out, and I've sort of lost my clicker for some reason. One thing I do want to point out here is that you notice that there are a lot of blank lines. So right under that BBMBP 134, all those are blank, blank, blank. Sometimes it's not putting the specific device ID in here. Best I can tell is that that is being aggregated from all the different devices. So you might see some slightly redundant information in there. So if I have my work MacBook Pro, my iPhone, one has 20 minutes, one has 40 minutes. Combine those together, it might say 60 minutes. Now, usually when it tries to aggregate the time, the math is a little strange. It's a little bit off and doesn't make some logical sense sometimes. So I like to think that maybe Apple is doing some weird kind of deconflicting between the different devices. So that's why they might not quite add up properly. But that's what is happening right there. So next one, timed items. So timed items, this is where we're going to get more into the application specific information. So got a couple of different apps here. Now, a lot of the times when I'm browsing in Safari, it's going to grab the URLs instead of just a whole Safari category. So that's a little bit different. But it's going to show me that I've been on GoToWebinar for, it says 7.5 hours. Now, I should mention with the Mac times, because all these screens are all up at the same time, and sometimes you just have them up for days on end, it's going to aggregate that time. So with the Mac version, kind of, take that with a grain of salt. iOS is a little bit more specific because you can really only have one screen at a time. The Mac side, a little bit different. But I got my GoToWebinar, I've got Twitter, of course, and the latest and greatest application, which is Zoom. So doing a lot of video conferencing recently. So this is going to be timed items. So click over here. Let me make this a little bit smaller. All right, so now these timed items, these are going to be stored by the bundle IDs for the application. One thing that I've been noticing in my analysis of screen time is that it does tend to take the bundle ID from the mobile device first. And what I mean by this is that an application may have two different bundle IDs, one for the Mac side, one for the iOS side. So some things like Apple Mobile Safari in here. Twitter, com8bits.tweety2. So in this case, if I were browsing Twitter through my Safari application on my Mac, that time is actually going to be associated with the bundle ID for iOS. So that's kind of an interesting thing to wrap your head around. If you're used to finding specific bundle IDs, they kind of merge them all together in the screen time information. So you notice this com8bits.tweety2, it's not that I had the Twitter application installed on my desktop. It's because I was browsing twitter.com through Safari. So we see that my MacBook Pro over here. And same things with the Apple native application. Mobile Notes, instead of Apple Notes, it's just going to throw everything into that Mobile Notes one there. So what's one of the stranger pieces about this? So now all the applications in here, and just to point out a couple of the unspecified ones, unspecified 3, we have Finder, we have System Preferences, Mobile Safari is under unspecified 2. And that kind of looks weird. Why aren't they reporting Mobile Safari? Well, because Safari, they're actually extracting it on a per URL basis. So that GoToWebinar URL, probably find some GitHub ones in here as well. So it's sort of hiding it and going a little bit further. So it's interesting to see how it kind of all works in the background. But other than that, we get the category again, the app usage time and seconds and minutes, and all that same device information associated with that. Now, one final one for screen time. Now I'm going over to the left-hand side here, and I want to get the information about notifications, like how many Twitter messages, how many Slack messages, how many email notifications did I get in a certain hour. And then we have pickups. Now, pickups is a little bit interesting. I get pickups from an iOS perspective. I get a notification, I pick it up, I go to that application. From the Mac perspective, I'm still kind of playing around with that. I don't necessarily know what a pickup represents. It's not like I'm picking up my laptop or my MacBook, MacBook Pro or my trash can or whatever it might be. So that one's kind of interesting to me. So a lot of these places I want to do a little bit further research on what actually causes a quote unquote pickup. Oops. Now these are considered counted items. We got timed items and we get counted items. These are the two main tables within the screen time database. There's actually quite a few more, but the two primary things that it's aggregating. So we get the counted information up here. And just to zoom in a little bit more, again, we get the a per hour basis, the bundle ID, and a couple of other columns here, notifications and number of pickups. And again, it's being aggregated across multiple devices here. What the first pickup timestamp is, it's recording all of this information. So we can kind of go through here. Now, for the most part, this is going to be stored for about 30 days or so. So it's not going to be stored forever, but we're looking at about 30 days. All right, so that is screen time. All of it is fairly generic. Maybe we want to get a little bit more specific information. This is where we're going to go to the knowledge C and the power log databases. So let me just close this one up. I'm going to go to knowledge C over here. Now, knowledge C has a lot of stuff in here, and usually takes me about 20 minutes to find the module that I'm looking for. But first one I want to talk about is this app in focus one. So I've talked about this one from an iOS perspective before, because it is a really important and useful module. So knowledge C tends to store start and end timestamps. So when I'm using this device, whether it's Mac or iOS, it's storing how long I've been using this particular application. Again, it's storing it by its bundle ID, and I've also calculated out the minutes here. So if I just want to visually go through here and see, 20 minutes in Slack, that's not a big surprise. 67 minutes on the screensaver. So on the Mac or on the Mac OS side, we're certainly going to have some screensaver. Right after the screensaver, we get a login window bundle ID here. So I'm waking it up, I'm logging in, and I'm going to Slack. I'm waking it up, logging in, and I'm going to Slack. You see a pattern here? This is what my work life is actually all about. So you start seeing the pattern of how people use their devices. So this one is called application in focus because it's the application that is where the user is actually looking at. Now, this particular information comes from the system knowledge C. So there are two knowledge C databases on Mac devices, one for the whole system and then one for each specific user. So this data comes from the system. And so I don't know which user was logging in. I don't know which user was using Slack. I don't know which user was using Outlook. This is where we need to maybe look into some other databases to get better information. But this is a great start. It's going to tell me how long a specific application was being used. So very similar to that, if I go to the power log, and this one's going to be, the knowledge C is going to be stored here for about 4 weeks. Power log is a little bit different. They call the power log one the app frontmost. So when I'm naming these modules, very often it's very similar to the database name that I'm extracting the data. So if it's got a weird name to it, not my fault. Blame Apple for naming their database tables in weird ways. All right, so power log, basically the same information. We have a timestamp, we have a bundle ID, ASN numbers in here, the types of application, system or otherwise. But you start seeing some other columns in here: original timestamp, offset timestamp, time offset. And this timestamp here is specifically called adjusted. So power log is a strange database when it comes to timestamps. They store their timestamps with an offset. So when you're just reading the straight up database in your favorite SQLite viewer, do not trust those timestamps. These have been adjusted, and this one's about just under 300,000 seconds, which is actually about a month and 2 days, if I recall correctly. This is why I give you the original timestamp. So if I was just assuming that this timestamp was right, I would think that this was being used on April 30th. It was not. It was actually being used on May 4th. So just be really cautious about that. And the time offset is going to be different for everybody's different system. You're going to find the same thing on iOS as you do on macOS. So I specifically created my query to account for that. So there's this whole other table that has all the offsets. And if you start looking at the modules, you're going to find that these are fairly complicated SQL queries, but mostly just to adjust for these strange timestamps. But in my own testing, these are pretty much spot on. Now my query, they might be 1 or 2 seconds off, but it's a heck of a lot better than say 2 or 3 days or a month or whatever that time offset might be. We still get the same idea here. What application was a user using at a specific time? Just like the knowledge C, this power log one is also on a system level. So it doesn't tell me which user it actually is. So let's get more into the user specific application usage ones. So I'm going to go back to the knowledge C. I'm always bouncing back and forth between knowledge C and power log. Those are the two big databases that we have here. And I'm going to go to app usage. Once I find app usage, there we go. Now, if you're curious, is this the system one or is this the user one? Click on an entry and it's going to show you the path that it's coming from, either in the metadata pane or right at the bottom here. So because I did an LO1, it's copying the full path here. It's coming from my users, my home directory, for my Sarah account, but you'll also be able to find it here. But when it runs, it's going to aggregate all the information. So if you got 5 users on there, you're going to have a system one and then 5 other knowledge Cs for different users. This is how you can start putting together, okay, what user was using a certain application. So going back to app usage. So this one again is specific for the user. And this one's going to show start and end times again and the bundle ID. You start seeing the same type of data over and over and over again. So you really have to drill down into this. And you might be looking at all sorts of different tables. This is why I try to show you all the different aspects of this. So now I know exactly what I was doing on, let's see, April 7th at 8:40 in the morning. I was using a bunch of different applications here: SQLite browser, preview, iCal, Xcode, Excel. Now, because this is being extracted from a Mac, the usage here is all the same for a very specific time period. It's because I had all these windows open at the same time, multiple desktops, all of them. So this, I can tell, okay, the user was using it at this time. I might go back to the system version of this to find more explicit in focus time. So just because it's opened doesn't necessarily mean it's in focus. So you really are going to bounce around to all these different databases. It's also worth mentioning there's this device hardware UUID here. There we go. If you have other devices associated with your account, so I have all my iCloud, everything with all my Apple devices associated and syncing together, you may find information being synced to the Mac. So of course I got my iPhone synced here. This is a UUID for one of these devices. Actually, I think that's one of my iPads. I'm not entirely sure, but you will start seeing different device IDs for other laptops, other Macs, other iOS devices, if they are all correlating around the same Apple ID. So it's not just that Mac's information. You might have a whole ecosystem of Apple devices to look at. From a forensics perspective, that's awesome. If I don't have this phone, I can still see what the user was doing at a specific time period. That is great information to have, especially when phones are ridiculously hard to get into these days. So sometimes you got to get creative and look for different sources of data. So that is for the user. Let's see, and one more that I would like to talk about is app intents. Now, due to the configuration of my work system, I don't have anything in app intents here. So I'm going to show you some examples from my own personal laptop system. So this looks a little bit strange, but this is me running the same query just in SQLite database viewer. But it would look very much the same within BlackLight if you do have app intents. So app intents are another form of application usage, but it provides you a little bit more context. What is happening in this particular application? Now for this app intents, it does tend to be mostly mobile information. For whatever reasons, that's getting pushed to my Mac device. So I did extract this knowledge C database from a Mac system, my Mac system. but it shows me all the different applications that I was using on my iOS device or my iPhone. Messages here, Twitter is over here too. And the intent class and the intent verb are going to be very specific. It's going to say, oh, Sarah was sending a message, or she was toggling an alarm. That's probably me turning off my morning alarm because I want to sleep in. Composing a message in Twitter, creating a DM to somebody, a direct message to somebody. So it provides a little bit more context to what's actually happening. And of course, we got send message here. Now highlighted here in yellow is the lazy part about Apollo. So Apple Pattern of Life lazy outputter. There are, of course, plenty of databases that have binary data being stored in these database cells here. Everything from binary p-lists to gzips to protobufs to images. You never know quite what you're going to get in a SQL database. So Apollo is lazy. It's not going to do anything with this binary data, but I am going to show it to you in hex. Now, if you're good at looking at hex values, you know, some eagle-eyed viewers here are probably going to say, hey, that's a binary p-list. Absolutely. So 6270, and then we get the 3030 here, is the hex header for a binary p-list, that BP list 00. So I can actually extract some of this information, and I'll show you how to do this in BlackLight a little bit later on in a different module, but I can extract this for even more context. How is the user using this information? And then we have a little bit more information over here. Conversation identifiers. You're going to get some contact information for a lot of the messaging stuff being stored in here. So let's take a look at an example of an app intent. So I went to a HTCIA meeting up in New York right before this whole pandemic started, more or less. Loved to go to New York. What a wonderful city to go to. Took the train up there. I live in DC. So I'm here sitting in the hotel lobby, if I remember correctly, and I'm basically waiting for Heather. So Heather and I were supposed to present together like we always do, and I'm stalking her on Find My Friends, Find My Phone, Find My Friends, you know, whatever they call the application these days. So I'm in the lobby, probably having a cocktail, and more or less stalking her. And she just got into the city. She's in a taxi, and I can just see her creeping and creeping up. This is about 5 or 6 p.m. in the evening. So I think she can walk faster at this point. So there's quite a bit of traffic in here. So I keep opening it up, trying to find out where she is. That action, and not all actions, but this particular action is being stored in this app intense structure here. So every time I opened up Find My Phone to go stalk Heather, it was creating that. It was creating this locate intent here. Now, when I open up that serialized interaction, that binary p-list, and I throw it onto a hex editor for an example here, it's going to show who I'm looking at. So I've got a few friends in here that I like to poke around and see where they're at. They're all at home right now. Big surprise there. But I can see her contact information, her phone number, her email, her name associated with that, all sorts of useful information. So providing context to what the user is doing, this is where intents are going to be very, very useful. All right, now let's talk a little bit about notifications. So kind of works alongside of application usage. You know, if somebody's slacking me over and over again, or I'm getting multiple emails in, it all shows up in that little, I don't know, drawer, I guess they call it, on the right-hand side there, that notification center area. Now, as far as notifications are concerned, there's a couple of different databases that I can extract some of this information. First one we're going to go to is the Knowledge C. Second one, we're going to go to specifically the Notification Center database. So in this example, it's on May 4th, so a couple of days ago, getting a bunch of Slack messages in. I was listening to some Star Wars because, of course, May the 4th, and it was telling me screen time from the previous day. I spent 10 hours and 36 minutes of screen time, which I do believe that's a little bit low, only because I didn't add my additional devices at that point, because I spend all day on my devices. So let's take a look at the notifications. So the first one I want to talk about is the user notifications. If I can find it. There we go. Under Knowledge C, we got notification usage. I'm me just muck around with these a little bit to give you a little bit more context. Perfect. Oops. I want us to keep scrolling. All right, so this is a great example here. So we got the timestamps again, same thing, start and end. Probably going to be pretty much the same timestamp because notification really doesn't take all that much time. We see the bundle ID for the notification, news, Twitter, mobile SMS, the messaging application. And there's different types up in here as well. But I do want to point out the device ID. So these are going to be coming from more than just your Mac. If you got all your devices associated, it could be your Mac, your other Mac, your other Mac, your phone, your other iPhone, your other iPhone, your iPad. You know, if you have them all associated with the same account, you could potentially find evidence of all these in this one single database here. So everything has that device UUID. Very, very useful information, very specific down to a single device. Not everyone's going to have this 228 number. That's mine. That is my, I don't know, iPhone or iPad or something. No one else is going to have that unless they take it from me. So let's see, I want to show you some better examples here. There we go. Now getting a little context here under the ID, you might get a little bit of context. So Slack notification, whenever you see these X core data and some GUID and alarms, those are going to be associated with some sort of data. It's pulling out of another database. I might go search for this GUID in the iCal, the calendar database. Maybe it's an alert of a meeting starting, something like that. Let's see, Apple Time Machine dry spell. This is it bugging me that I haven't plugged in my Time Machine backup and backed it up in a few days or so. Yep, gotta fix my Time Machine because it keeps popping up. System updates, you know, you get that little system update in the right upper corner there, and you keep ignoring and saying tomorrow. That type of action is going to show up in this particular database here. So all sorts of different applications, system, third party, you may have notifications being turned on in here. Now the next one is specific to notifications. So it's called the Notification Center. That's that little drawer that comes up on the right-hand side here. Now this one's going to kind of show you some information. I'm going to try to scroll down and show you some of my newer ones here. Collapse some of these. All right, so we get the timestamp again for these notifications. It should pretty much jive with the other notifications database that I just showed you. The bundle ID associated with it, the presentation style here, and we get another embedded plist. Again, lazy outputter, it's showing me the hex of this. So that 6270, 3030, that's a great way to identify this is a binary plist. I need to go find some additional information here. Now what I do, in most of these queries, if it's possible, I give you the original row ID or the primary key associated with this entry. So if I want to go, what was I playing, Apple Music, I'm going to go to that 2781 in the database and be able to extract this binary plist, get a little bit more information. So let me go ahead and do that. And it's actually pretty easy to do in BlackLight and the Apollo plugin together. So I'm going to open up the preview. It's going to show me this database here. Click on an entry. I'm going to go to the record table. So I try to label what table it's coming from so you can kind of identify it quickly. So what was I listening to? What was my last music notification? 2781. Should be the last one here. 2781. I'm going to go to view plist here. Let me just zoom in. So this is the row ID that I've listed in the Apollo plugin. This is the plist that I want to go see. So I'm going to give that a click. Let me open this up a little bit. And you can see that my last music notification, not the one that I have the screenshot for, I went from listening to Star Wars information to listening to some Paul Van Dyke. So I kind of switch it up every once in a while, but you do get that additional context. Now, music is a good one to make note of this. You're not going to have every single notification. Now, there are no other music notifications in this database because it basically just shows you the last one before that time, before that data was captured. So I no longer have that Star Wars one to take a look at. So this data does not stick around forever. Music is a good one to show you there. However, other ones do stick around. You've noticed a lot of the Slack messages here are going to be around here forever. But if I go to the screen time one here, this one's got record ID 2729. This one here. This is the notification that I have a screenshot of. So that 10 hours and 36 minutes, boom, that's what my screen time is for that particular one. So some tend to go away and some stick around for a little bit. So kind of undetermined at this time what makes one stay versus another one leave. I'm sure it's probably up to this specific application. So that is notifications. Few other examples of some notifications. This one's coming from the Knowledge C, again, my own personal device. I got little snitch running, so whenever I connect to or any application calls out, it's gonna pop up a little box here. Anytime an application asks for permissions, I want access to the camera, I want access to the downloads directory, what have you, get a little notification, ask permissions one. Whenever I receive an airdrop, sharing D and notification type of receive. So this is great for kind of identifying some sharing information, some airdrop information. And then notifications from other devices. So I don't have Signal installed on my own personal computer, but I sure do have it on my iOS device. So I see some Whisper System Signal information here. So whenever I receive a notification there, it also gets populated into my Knowledge C database. So that is kind of cool to see the cross-contamination, if you will, from mobile devices to Mac devices and so on. Pretty useful stuff. Now, another example of the notification center, extracting out one of those plist files, talking a little bit more about that little snitch. That little snitch, maybe I want to know what applications were, calling home. That could be very, very useful in intrusion examinations. So we've got little snitch on here. It is recording that information. So I opened up that plist file, and Google Earth likes to call home. Not surprised, most applications do. And it's created a new silent mode connection. So I probably wouldn't think that this is too, not really malicious. This is pretty much how Google Earth works. But this can be a good way to find, other evidence that something else might be calling out that you're not necessarily aware of. And now last one from the user side, let's talk about media usage. Going back to the system Knowledge C, I want to know what I'm playing at a given time. So in those notifications, we do lose some of those music ones, but the media usage does tend to keep this information around. So some modules are great for other types of investigations. So let's take a look at the now playing one. So I'm going back up to Knowledge C here. Audio media now playing. All right, so this is keeping track of what's playing and which application. Now, when you happen to see com.apple.webkit.web content, this is me scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and watching Twitter movies. So I'm scrolling through Twitter, and each one of those little movies that plays is getting recorded in here. It doesn't really tell me which little movie is playing in Twitter, but it does show Twitter is being used here. So you might have to go investigate that a little bit further. But if I'm playing something in YouTube, so I'm watching some code breaker information here, it's also going to show up. So whenever you see WebKit or web content, you're probably going to start thinking web browsers and maybe more specifically Safari in this particular case here. They use WebKit to display those. So you can correlate that with the other application usage as well. Now, just want to show you a few other examples. It looks like I browsed Twitter a lot. I promise I do work. All right, here we go. This is a great, oop, nope, stop scrolling. All right, so this is a good example of another application. So Apple Music. So the music application, turned it on to some of my playlists. Now playing from albums, artists, genres, durations, usage in seconds. Now, one thing I do like to point out is sometimes you get a really long usage in seconds here. Let me see if I can find one. Perfect. This is usually an instance of a song or a movie or a video or whatever the media is being paused. So certainly take a look at the duration of this particular piece of media. So that's duration in seconds, and see how long it was actually playing for. So if it's more than the actual length of the video or song, it does tend to mean that they've paused that particular piece of media. So, take that with a grain of salt. This is good though for trying to figure out what are people listening to. All right, do we have any questions before I get into some of the system level items?
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, we've had a few come in. We won't get to all of them right now, so we'll save some time for later in the presentation too. So we will start with, in the Knowledge C database, is it possible to create a filter to show only the SQLite rows that belong to a specific user, especially on a computer with many local users?
So no, not right now. So the filter feature unfortunately does not quite work in the Apollo piece yet, because it's unstructured data. So everywhere else in BlackLight, it works wonderfully. It's actually one of my favorite features ever. But it will not work in the Apollo area specifically just yet. So in that case, I might go in and maybe extract the user's Knowledge C database and just bring that in to its own evidence item, and then I can filter on just that one. That would be my recommendation.
Thanks for clarifying. How long does screen time data stick around for?
So screen time data is going to be about 30 days or so, at least from my Mac device. Now, Apple can certainly change this. They can change it on a per platform basis as well. But in my testing, I've seen upwards of 30 days or so.
Perfect. So we will get to a few more questions at the end of the webinar if we have time, but if you want to just keep going, Sarah, that would be great.
Perfect. All right, so now we're going to start getting into some more of the system specific items. So system state, these aren't exactly the most sexiest of modules, but they can be really darn useful when you're looking to see, okay, was the system up and running? Was it plugged in? Was the camera on? Was the laptop open? So I'm going to go through a couple of these. Probably not all of them, because they all work generally the same way. Is it on or is it off? That kind of thing. So let me start off with, since I'm in Knowledge C, let me go ahead and take a look at device battery level. So we get battery levels in both Knowledge C and Power Log. Again, we get a lot of that similarity. And it's quite literally just the battery level. If you want to know if it was charged, when it was draining, maybe if you want to see why it was draining, probably for me it's because I'm browsing Twitter all day long. You can see that going down, up and down, up and down. So not a whole lot of stuff going on with that one. And then real quickly, device plugged in. Again, it's really not a whole lot of analysis to do here. Is it plugged in or is it not plugged in? So I've worked the query in to basically tell you, okay, it was plugged in for this amount of seconds and minutes, and it was unplugged for this amount of seconds and minutes. Let's see, let's move to the Power Log now, show some of those examples. Let's do camera state. Again, quite literally on and off. All right, so this is going to be my webcam, if you will. So of course I've been doing a lot of different webcasts, Zoom, GoToWebinar, and the camera's been on. I've actually been showing my face, so I can see and maybe correlate this with different applications to see, okay, why is the camera on? Why is the camera off, and where it's associated with there. So it does go on and off, on and off, on and off, seemingly quite a lot of times, depending on how the software actually works. So I think this one here is actually very, very specific. This 12 o'clock hour, 1 o'clock hour, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, Control-Alt-Delete. So Heather has this fantastic little, very, very low-key, very chill kind of lunch get-together where we all Zoom call and we have little presentations and we're chatting and we're asking questions. So I'm going to throw up a link to that a little bit later on. But if you do have your free 30 minutes during your lunch hour, it is a great time to kind of see other people, other colleagues in the industry. So some good times going on there. Gotta advertise when I can. Now, clamshell state. Now this one has, again, a strange name, but think of a laptop as a clamshell. It's either laptop is open or laptop is closed. So closed is a 1, open is a 0. So look at those column names to have it make a little bit more sense. I might update this module a little bit later on to just basically say open or closed. So that would be an easy thing for me to update. And I might do that right after this call. Let's see what else we got here. Oh, power state. I want to talk about power state. So I like power state mostly because I might be too lazy to go to the logs, and I just want to know, was the system up and running or was it closed down? that's as simple as I want to know. So power state's going to tell me, when did the system wake up? And whenever you see things like maintenance RTC, that is the system waking itself up. So the laptop might be closed, but it's still going to wake up using PowerNap and say, check for email, check for updates, check for whatever. It's purely doing maintenance tasks. It's not the user doing it. But when I see user activity assertion here and lid open, that I know is the user going in there and opening up their actual laptop lid and maybe doing whatever users might do. So it does provide some interesting context. All right. So next ones I want to talk about a little bit about processes and network usage. So a couple of different databases here, net usage database, and again, going back to the power log. I'm not going to show you every one of these because I know we're running out of time. They all generally look the same. Let's see, net usage. So ZLive usage here is basically keeping track of the traffic, the processes, the bundle IDs for all these different things. So if you're looking for different processes, you can either go to Z process or ZLive usage. The main difference with ZLive usage is that it's going to show you usage information. So traffic going in and out for a specific service or a specific application. Now, from an intrusion perspective, I might use this as a first level triage. I might sort by, say, Wi-Fi out if I'm doing some sort of exfiltration case. What process is sending the most data out of here? Now, I think when I sort mine, it's Dropbox. Okay, Dropbox probably, sending and receiving quite a bit of data. But if it's an unknown process, I can go investigate that process a little bit more. So this one is great from a triage perspective. Now going back to PowerLog, this one can be kind of interesting. So there's a couple of different ones. We've got process, data usage, process ID, process monitor dynamic. I'm going to show you 2 of them, how you can kind of pair them up to get the most information. I'm just going to sort by process name here. Makes for a good example. So I'm looking for a process name of ZSH, so Z shell. So 1015, we have a new shell. Instead of bash, we're saying Z shell. So I have all these process IDs for Z Shell. Each one of these could be a different terminal window open at a given time period. You can basically look at the timestamps to kind of get a feeling for when this process was in use. So it's not just currently, but also historically as well. So super useful from a computer intrusion perspective. But one thing that I do like is this coalition ID. This ties everything together, really ties the room together, if you will. So this 349 here, if I go back to another table, so 349 for coalition ID, if I go back to coalition interval, and I do a sort here by the coalition ID, and I find 349, I can see what application Z Shell is running under. I always scroll too far. There we go. So we see here 349 is associated with COM Apple Terminal. All right, so probably not too malicious here, but it's one of those things to certainly keep in mind. If I see some other weird process in here, I might want to investigate that a little bit further. And you could do that with all these different processes, and there could be hundreds and thousands of different processes running at any given time period. So it's a great way to start investigating that, not just the current ones, but historical ones as well. All right, 2 more tiny modules before I leave you for the day. These are going to be more security specific. So quarantine and the TCC database, or transparency, consent, and control. So I go and browse to something. I download a specific piece of software. I'm using Signal here just as an example. I launch it and I get this little warning. Signal is an app you download from the internet. You sure you want to download it? Apple checked it for malicious software and none was detected. This is quarantining. So this is part of the security aspects of the Mac system. But this action is getting recorded in a particular database. We'll take a look at that in just a second. Next, when I run this application, if I say open, they start asking for all the different permissions. And this is where the TCC gets put in here. So Signal is asking for access to the microphone. If I allow it, that also is going to get recorded into the transparency, consent, and control database. So the application permissions database. So I have one of my favorite GIFs here. Celebrate was nice enough to tweet this GIF of Heather out, and I had to go and copy this. I needed to get this GIF because I was going to use it in every presentation I possibly could. And it makes me happy. When I'm having a down day, I just throw this GIF up and Heather's giving me 2 thumbs up. And I feel a little bit happier about myself. And again, just another shout out to her Control-Alt-Delete Zoom. It's super casual, 30 minutes, and you can go register there. I think we're going to give you the link in the chat as well, so you don't have to take a picture or copy this down or anything. So I went and I got this GIF. So let's check out the quarantine. Oops. Let's check out the quarantine database. All right, so this quarantine database, it's a pretty simple database. There's really one table of interest in here. It's going to record the timestamp that a certain item was quarantined, the event ID, what downloaded it, Chrome, messages or iChat. Sharing D is an artifact of AirDrop, and some other information. So this particular GIF, I basically carved out of Twitter using Easy GIF. You'd be surprised how hard it is to save a GIF from Twitter. And I saved it down to my system as Easy GIF, whatever, .gif here. So if I want to search for this Easy GIF on my file system, I'm going to come up short. It no longer exists. I actually, got it in my downloads directory and I renamed it. But one thing I can do here is I can use this event identifier. So I believe this one starts with A3C18. Let me try to zoom in on that a little bit more. So that AC318 number there. So I can search in BlackLight the file system metadata to find this. So whenever something downloads to the system, it normally gets this quarantine attribute and it stores this event ID. So I'm going to go into File Filter. I've already got it prepped and ready to go, but let me run it first. Oops. Well, I did have it ready to go. I think I've probably prepped too much. All right, well, that is a demo fail. So let me go ahead and browse to it. I really do want to show you this information. So I even called it heatherthumbsup.gif. I probably just put in the wrong GUID here, unfortunately. So we got this COM Apple quarantine attribute here. This is an extended attribute. So what I was filtering for, at least attempting to filter for, was this A3C18. And I think I actually put the 0 in a little bit too early on that particular query. So that's how I can identify it. So I got the quarantine database. I can also find the actual specific file associated with that. And then we get the where from's information, which should be pretty much the same two URLs that we saw in the quarantine database. So let me go back to this. So one more module. We got the transparency, consent, and control, or TCC database. So this is keeping track of all the different application permissions associated with different apps. Now there's two different TCC databases. There's one for each user for user specific items, and then one for system level stuff like full disk access. So I downloaded Zoom, I ran Zoom. Of course, it's going to ask me for permissions to the camera that's stored in the user and full disk access for the system. And I did not provide it access for that because that seems like a bad thing to do, but it does provide a good example. Oops. So let me jump over here to TCC. I'm going to sort by the client here so we can just see the Zoom data. All right, so the client is the bundle ID. In this case, I have Zoom, so not allowed or allowed. So not allowed here, that system policy all files, basically saying, nope, you can't have access to that. But I did allow the camera, the microphone, and access to the downloads folder. So TCC database, they all have last written time. So if I go back and change my mind on the microphone or the camera, it will update that timestamp as well. So pretty darn useful to see that. And again, from a security aspect, I can just sort by that last modified and see, does anything, not fit the profile of what was happening on this particular system. So to leave you with that, does anybody else have any questions? And while you might be writing some of them into the chat window here, if you do have questions that we don't get to today, please feel free to email me, Sarah at BlackBagTech. And that is Sarah with an H. There is another Sarah without an H. She just forwards me emails anyway, so eventually I will get it. Or Twitter. I am, like you saw, very much on Twitter all the time at IamEVLTwin. And if you want to check out some of the Apollo, the open source project, you can go to that URL there in my blog at Mac Forensics. If you are interested in getting a demo and playing around with BlackLight, sure, please feel free to contact sales at BlackBag. All right, so thank you for coming. Do we have any questions?
Thanks, Sarah. We did get some more questions that come in, but I see some people are just starting to drop, so I want to be just aware of time. So I think if you're good with it, we'll just respond to people individually and just go forward with answering questions that way, if you're good with that.
Sure thing. Going anywhere.
Awesome. And we want to give you a big thank you for doing this today, for walking through all this information and walking us through how to analyze macOS with the Apollo plugin. And as Sarah said, if you want to learn more about any of our products that Sarah talked about today or any services, please email sales@blackbagtech.com, and be sure to follow Black Bag Tech on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn, and subscribe to our blog at blackbagtech.com. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Thank you again, Sarah, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much, everyone.